Hello, I'm Paul Perello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. Have you ever wondered about becoming a manager at work? Maybe you feel you don't have enough experience to take your career to the next level. Or how about being a manager and feel that you're sort of stuck in neutral in your management skills? Well, then you don't want to touch that remote control by any stretch of the imagination, because on our program, we have an author who has written a book called The 10 Commandments of Management, Biblically Inspired Methods to Success. Our guest is Kay Palmer Hart, the author of this book. He has 30 years of diverse management experience, administrative and consulting experience with national and regional, corporate, and nonprofit clients. His book offers the 10 things managers need to know how to do using proven business models that are based with a solid biblical teaching. And I want to welcome Palmer Hart to our program. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here.
You have quite the resume, I have to say. I mean, you have worked for clients as big as Pepsi, and you have worked with clients as equally as important as in Camden City, and not to, put one above the other, but Pepsi we think of as this big, beverage company, but also equally important is the mission of some of the clients that you've worked with in Camden City. So, given this broad landscape of clients that you've worked with, I'm sure you've seen both ends of the spectrum when it comes to management. There's good management and there's not so good management.
Not so good, right?
Yeah.
And really one of the reasons I wrote this book was because, and I'm not singling out those two that you just mentioned,
right.
But because I've seen so many people struggle with how to manage people effectively. And the real focus of this book is on managing people. It's not about doing budgets and that sort of thing. But I've seen people struggle, and a main reason for that is that so few people actually study management and managing people and people per se as a background to taking on a managerial position. Many people who wind up in managerial positions do so because they're good at something else. Maybe they're good at the thing they're going to supervise or manage, but they aren't necessarily picked because they are good managers.
Oftentimes, people find themselves being thrust into a management position with little or no experience because they just happen to be at the right place at the right time, or the boss turns around and says, well, let's get John to do it. John can handle the job. John may not have the experience, but he might just be that person who just happens to be walking in the hallway at that time.
Yeah, well, I hope it's a little better than walking in the hallway, but that is one of the concerns I had, and as I said, is one of the reasons I wrote this book, is because what I would like to see the quality of management in companies and nonprofits around the country improved, because I've run into so many bad managers over the years, and so many people who were totally in over their head and wasting their time and the company's time, and in fact doing damage to the people who were working for them. So that was a key part of why I wrote this book. At one point I became so frustrated with the quality of management that I was seeing in the training courses that I was leading and in the people I was working with, that I said, we really need to license people to do this work, because we have no way of controlling whether they know anything or they don't know anything about how to be effective with other people. And the damage that they can do to people, psychologically as well as otherwise, is really quite extensive, considering that most of us spend a huge portion of our lives in the workplace, being affected by the people who are our managers, either for good or for ill.
Oftentimes, and I'm sure you've heard this, you will hear from workers ask that proverbial question: how did they ever get into that position?
Yeah.
A, because they may not have the experience, or B, they may have known someone and they just played the game and got into that position. Or you may often find a good manager who gets him or herself in a position, and then it's not all what it was supposed to be. And now that good manager is so caught up in the daily grind of that company that they start to perhaps lose their focus.
Yes. Well, or they get themselves involved in situations that they don't really know how to handle. The other thing I had in mind when I was writing this book was that it could be a desk reference for managers, something that you would keep in your drawer. And when you ran into a situation that was baffling you, you could pull this book out, and there might be one of the 10 Commandments that related to the situation that you were having to deal with. And that was a second hope that I had, that it would be a sort of ready reference of basic things that managers need to know how to do. That's really also why I chose the title, the 10 Commandments, because these are 10 things that most every manager is going to encounter in their managerial life cycle, and that they need to know how to do. And so what I did was I picked from all the different kinds of things that I've seen managers have to do over the years, and all the kinds of questions that I've consulted with managers on over the years. And I said, what are the things that keep coming up over and over again? And these are the things that kept coming up.
Before we get into the 10 Commandments, I have to ask the question, because the name of the book is The 10 Commandments of Management, Biblically Inspired Methods to Success. Some people might say, Palmer, that given the world that we operate in today, and the fast pace that we operate and business decisions are made, is there really room for biblically inspired methods to success?
Well, I think there is room for that, because I think it is possible to treat people in a way that is effective as well as with dignity. And in fact, I think that the more dignified you are in the way in which you deal with people, the more effective you're going to be, and conversely. So that's really where the biblically inspired comes in. What I did was I took each of these 10 management principles and I said, what are some of the things that you could find in the Christian Gospels that might inform this particular point that I'm trying to make here, this particular skill that I'm trying to get across in this chapter? And the interesting thing was that when I set about doing that, what I found was it wasn't really that hard. But it's reading the Gospels in a slightly different way. It's reading them more in terms of the interaction that Jesus and his disciples have, for example, than it is looking for particularly the message. Like when we read a miracle story, we think about a miracle. But what I'm interested in is, what is the interaction that Jesus had with that particular person? What was the process he used in his interaction with that person? And that's really what the focus is here in this book. So I don't see it as incompatible. And furthermore, my understanding, I'm not intimately involved with business schools as much as I used to be, but I think a lot of business schools are concerned about ethics today. And ethical teaching. And this, again, is not so much an ethics manual.
Sure.
It isn't. It really is about how do I interact effectively with people around the things that managers need to do, like hiring, like setting direction. But it is an ethical way to treat people. That's the way I would look at it.
Would you agree that in this fast-paced environment, business environment that we're in today, that ethics sometimes takes the back seat to decision-making, because a decision has to be made today, it needs to be made now, and so you really don't have an opportunity, a manager might not have the opportunity to sit down and thoroughly think the issue through before he or she makes I'm not saying I don't want to paint with a broad brush here, but sometimes it seems like managers are trigger happy. They just make a decision at the spur of the moment because they have to, because if they don't, someone up top might make that decision for them.
Well, I think you're probably right. Speed has something to do with it. And if I have to make an off the top of my head decision, then I may not think it through.
Sure.
I may not make an adult decision. I may make a kind of knee-jerk decision. But I think the other thing that I see that's going on in businesses today, and this worries me a good deal, it also is what I see going on with a lot of employees, is that a lot of people are in survivor mode. They are worried about holding on to their job and their situation, and they do what they think they need to do in order to do that. And one of the really unfortunate things about employees who are in survivor mode is that very often what they do is they hide. They try to stay out of the line of fire. They try to do nothing that's going to call too much attention to themselves. And just at a time when the country needs people to be breaking the mold, thinking out of the box, being entrepreneurial in their thinking, taking some risks, we have a workforce that's come through this recession that hit us back in 2008. It was really shell-shocked with the level of people or the number of people that they saw let go. And so the consequence of that, as I see it, as I said a minute ago, is that you've got a lot of people in the workplace in survivor mode. And I would say that that's probably true of many of the businesses that these people are working for.
Sure.
And people who are in survivor mode are not going to make necessarily well thought out, reasoned decisions. It's not a direct line equation there, but it makes it more difficult, let's put it that way.
And for the employee who might also be in survival mode, he or she might be a little more reluctant to step outside of the box and perhaps offer a suggestion, a comment, or a concern to their supervisor, or maybe even the CEO of the company, because I don't want to draw attention to my situation, or I don't want them to know what it is that I do, because then, now I'm in the crosshairs.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to times that I've worked for companies where there was a significant downsizing going on, or where there was a merger that was going on. And I'm just thinking of team meetings, for example, that I used to attend during the time when those things were going on, and how hard it was to get people to speak up and say their piece, or say anything meaningful. You could just see the people who were in particular in survivor mode and who were hiding, and they would just sit there a whole meeting. They would say nothing. And if the boss didn't know how to draw people out, these people just skated. They just didn't get involved, and they stayed out of the line of fire, so to speak.
Commandment number 1, thou shalt select the right people.
Yep.
I guess it really all begins with surrounding yourself or hiring the right people, and everyone working to accomplish the goal that is set out by the mission statement of the company.
Yeah, I mean, it seems obvious, but I don't know that people spend as much time as they need to on the hiring process, and it is really critical. I'm going to go tomorrow, for example, to sit in on an interview for a nonprofit organization that I'm associated with. And there really is a lot of advanced thinking that needs to go into the interview itself. And the questions that we were thinking about asking at first were not really anything that was going to tell us about this person. I mean, you have a limited amount of time with an interviewee. You have a resume, you've culled through a bunch of resumes, but when that person gets in the room, you've got like an hour to figure out whether you want to spend the rest of your life with this person. Not exactly, but
right.
a significant chunk of your
yeah.
life with this person. And when you think about it, that's a pretty heavy thing. So one of the things that I recommend in that chapter is a skill called behavioral interviewing, where instead of asking a person what you think they're going to do, future-oriented, you ask them, you think about what this job requires, and you say, well, what have you done in the past? Let's say you're interviewing for an administrative assistant, and part of the job is that this person will have to work for multiple bosses. So one of the things I would immediately want to know is, how well does this person juggle competing demands? So I might say to you, Paul, in the past, when you've worked for several bosses at the same time, give me an example of when you had to deal with competing demands and how you handled it. The thesis here is, of course, that past behavior is a predictor of future behavior.
Sure.
Which for most of us it is. We don't change that quickly.
Sure.
And so more or less what you've done in the past is going to be a predictor of what you do in the future. I wish we interviewed our political candidates this way too. Instead of asking them, what are you going to do, where they throw out all these pie-in-the-sky kind of ideas. In fact, there was an editorial the other day on the radio about asking one of the mayoral candidates what he was going to do about whether he's going to continue the Nutter Green proclivity. And I thought the better question is to say, what have you personally done in the past on the green issue?
Sure. Yep.
much more telling about what this person really will do.
We're talking with Kay Palmer Hartle, who is the author of The 10 Commandments of Management, Biblically Inspired Methods to Success. I want to skip ahead to Commandment 3 rather. Thou shalt manage people as adults, not as children. And I think everyone has probably come across in their life, at least once, a manager who proceeds to treat employees more like children as opposed to adults. And you could hear the rumblings in the room once the boss leaves the room, and everybody sort of grumbles about the way he or she is treating the employees.
Yeah.
And it's so important because they are adults. We are adults. We should be treated as adults, not like, we're being reprimanded, like we're in, 5th grade.
Yeah, or taken care of. Either way is a parental stance towards the employee. In other words, not holding you or me accountable for my performance is just as much of a problem as criticizing me unendingly or in front of other people. I mean, both of those are parental things. One is what's called the nurturing parent response, which is taking care of you by not putting you on the spot. The other is the critical parent response, which is to criticize you and do it in a very unhelpful, unproductive way. Unfortunately, my case here would be that we have too much of this sort of management style in our modern organizations, and not enough adult-to-adult communication. And a lot of that is, again, because people are not really aware of what the difference is, right? We come with built-in parental responses, more or less, as a result of the way we were raised. In fact, the easiest thing for me to do or you to do is to act like your mother or father or whoever the important parental resources were in your life. And often people bring that into the workplace and they just they manage the way they were parented. And as you said a minute ago, you're an adult and I'm an adult, and when at work, that's what I want to be, an adult.
Sure.
I don't want to be treated as a little kid.
When a person finds themselves thrust into a management position, whether they apply for the job and they get it, or they're selected by the boss to be moved into this supervisory role, oftentimes companies will afford them the opportunity to go back to school or to workshops to hone their skills or
Right.
to sort of get the experience that they need, even if they've been a seasoned manager. Maybe they've managed a staff of 5 or 10, and now all of a sudden they find themselves managing a bigger staff. I think it's so vital and so important that they go for these type of education initiatives to increase their ability. But sometimes people will argue, Palmer, that I just can't afford it. The company doesn't offer reimbursement for attending some of these workshops. Should that person, that employee who is now the manager, or maybe the employee who's looking to segue into a management position, should they find the resources to take that class, take that workshop to sharpen their skills, whether they're a manager or thinking about becoming a manager?
I certainly would encourage that. Of course, I've spent a lot of my time over my professional career teaching those kinds of classes, and so I certainly would encourage people to take them. But again, that is one of the reasons I wrote this book. This is a simple, relatively inexpensive way
Sure.
to learn about management. But I think going to a class where you have colleagues, or even if they're strangers, who are learning about the same thing is a good way to do it. At least it's a good jump start. And then having something like this book to take home with you, to have as a ready reference, like I said, in your desk when things come up and you say, oh, well, what was it that went on in that class? And, oh, well, maybe there's a chapter about that in this book. That's what my hope was, because lots of times, and this was true for the management classes that I taught, there was this initial enthusiasm, called the smile sheets at the end of the experience, where people would write, answers to questions about how was this training for you, was it good, et cetera, et cetera. Almost all the time they were great. But we also knew that the amount of time that all those things were going to stick with people was not very good. It needs a lot of reinforcing, and it really needs on-the-spot reinforcing. This is why, by the way, in this area, in this industry of management, a lot of companies have gone more to individualized coaching, because typically individualized coaching stretches over a long period of time, and there's the possibility for reinforcement, especially when it comes to their senior executives. Lots of times companies will hire, I've been hired several times by companies or nonprofits to work with a key person in a key job who's new to that job to help that person get through a given patch, so to speak. And sometimes those assignments have lasted anywhere from 3 or 4 months to 2 years, where the company has said, well, this is worth it because this person's doing a good job, and you are, the person is saying that I'm helping them do that, and so let's keep, because it's worth it. Worth the expenditure.
One thing that I like is that each of the commandments, and I'm going to get into Commandment 8 here in a second, but each of the commandments starts with a biblical verse. I mean, and Commandment 8, thou shalt give feedback, you start off with a quotation from Matthew, right from the book of Matthew. Do not judge so that you may not be judged, for with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you will give will be the measure you get. Feedback is important, and I think the reason why you start each commandment with, you tie the commandments, you tie the commandments in with a biblical verse, so it brings the whole chapter full circle here. But feedback is where I'm going with this, is that oftentimes people, we talked about this earlier, are reluctant to give feedback, even though the boss says he or she would like feedback. They suggest, recommend, encourage feedback. Some people just feel like, I'm not putting my neck out on the line. I don't want to offer up feedback. They're going to know it's from me. I don't want to stir up the pot. But I think for any organization to move forward, it is vital for employees to offer feedback in order for that organization to move to the next plateau.
Yes, I mean, you don't grow without feedback. And in the classes, management classes I used to teach, we would do videotape role plays. And after each of those role plays, we would set up a situation that we thought they would likely encounter in their managing back home. And then we would stop and give them feedback about how they did in that videotaped role play and what they did well and what they could improve. And it was really one of the more important parts of the whole class, because they got direct feedback on their performance and how well they did and how well they didn't do. And people need feedback. We all need feedback in order to know where we stand with other folks and how good a job we're doing and what we're doing well and what we could do better. I was just consulting the other day with a small team of a president and the 2 people who report to him. And I did a little exercise with them called Start, Stop, and Continue. What do you want this person to start doing that they're not doing now? What do you want them to stop doing that they are doing now? And what are they doing right now that pleases you and you want them to continue to do? And they had never done this with each other. And they needed to do it because they're having some difficulties in relating to each other. And they need to get this stuff out in the open and discuss it. This is what adults do. Okay? I operate from an axiom that adults working with each other over time will periodically have trouble and difficulties with each other, just like people who are married have difficulties with each other. The hallmark of a decent marriage is not that you never have any trouble. The hallmark is that of a decent marriage is that when you do have trouble, you can figure out a way to work it out. And the same thing I think is true in the workplace. The hallmark of a decent work environment is not that we never have any arguments with each other. It's that we know how to solve them when we have them, and we know how to get it out on the table and discuss it rather than let it fester.
We have just about a few minutes left here in the program. Time's flying by, but I'm going to go to the 10th commandment. Thou shalt be prepared to change and know how to manage change. And that word change is a big word, because a lot of people will say, I don't like change. I want everything the way it was back when so-and-so ran the company. But one thing that we could be certain of, change is going to happen.
Right. It is ongoing. And quite frankly, it's probably one of the more difficult things that I did during my years as a consultant in working with senior managers, is to help them figure out how to set new direction and then how to get people to follow them in that direction. It's not easy. Culture change in particular is one of the most difficult things that I've ever tried to do. And we can see this working its way out on the world stage. I mean, what luck are we having in changing cultures where we try to intervene as a country?
Sure.
Not very much.
Right.
People are tenacious in holding on to to the same. The status quo is really the easiest place for most people to be. So, but nonetheless, you've got to know something about how to create a case for change, and that's one of the things I talk about in that chapter is how do I argue for and construct a case for change that'll make it more likely that you'd be willing to at least think about it rather than just shutting down and doing nothing.
Again, the name of the book is The 10 Commandments of Management, Biblically Inspired Methods to Success by K. Palmer Hartle. It is a great resource, and whether you're looking to get into management or if you're in management, and as Palmer said, you can put it on your desk, keep it in your desk drawer, and you can use it often as you like, as a great resource. And I want to thank you for your time, and can't believe how fast we flew by in the 30 minutes here, but this is, needless to say, an important book that is available now online. You could go online, Amazon.com, different places.
Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, those are the easiest places probably to get it.
Okay, again, the 10 Commandments of Management. I want to thank my guest for being with us here on this edition of the Philly Factor. Until the next time, have a great week. My name is Paul Perillo. Thanks so much for watching the Philly Factor.